I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
It's been almost 10 years since I've started this podcast. And first off, I'm going to recommend that everybody start a podcast, or at least have the philosophy I did when I started this, which is I didn't want anyone else to give me a show. For 20 years, I'd been pitching like TV shows, radio shows, all kinds of shows. And, you know, it's really hard to pitch a TV show. Like, it's really, you get in a room with a bunch of, I'm going to say it, not very bright people. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Some of them probably are very bright, but they're all so scared. They're scared of taking risks that are going to get them fired. Everybody in the TV business, and look, I worked in the TV business. I worked at HBO for several years. And again, I've had experience pitching shows to every single network in the world. And they always say, we want to do something new. We want to be the first to do something new. We want to take risks. And then at the end of the day, nobody wants to do anything new, and nobody wants to take any risks. And so a podcast, and ever since I was a kid, I love the idea of having an interview show, of being like a talk show host. I mean, I loved it. I remember, well, even like in the 90s when I wasn't a kid anymore, and I was doing the website for a book called The Late Shift, which was a history of the late night talk shows, Letterman Show, The Tonight Show, all these shows. I just was fascinated with the idea of being a talk show host. But then I realized even those talk shows are just BS. It's the guest comes on for 3 minutes. They have a pre-planned stupid interview. Like, none of those interviews are ever interesting. And when they get interesting, usually the guest is upset that it got interesting. And it seems so stupid. So a podcast, I can create my own show and do it about whatever I want. And if people like it, I'll know, because the show will do well and people will want more of it, then they'll listen to it. And I'll describe a little more what I've learned from the podcast. I mean, now after having like over, I don't know, must be like 1,300 guests or more, hopefully I've learned. I don't know what my life would be like if I hadn't spoken to these 1,300 people, but I've read a lot of books by these guys. I've talked to a lot of interesting heroes of mine, really. Like, you get to call up anybody you want and have them on your show and ask them any questions you want. It's an amazing thing. And I got to choose myself to do it, not to overuse that phrase. but I did choose myself there. And gosh, it's been a long time, and I hope I keep doing it for another 10 years. And I've been fortunate to have a
James,
great producer like Jay. What were you about to say, Jay?
I was about to ask you, like, what was your, I mean, obviously you always wanted the show, right? Always wanted the show, but what was the event or incident just prompted you, like, I'm just gonna pick up a phone and just start recording people? Like, do you remember the exact time, like exact mindset, like you wanted to do it?
Yeah, I mean, a couple people wanted me to do a financial newsletter for them. This is back again in 2013. And I didn't really want to do one for a lot of reasons. I was already, I liked writing about finance, but I was also writing more about things like the book Choose Yourself. Like the book Choose Yourself had just come out. And finally, some people said, listen, why don't you just do a podcast? And if that goes well, maybe you'll decide to do a newsletter.
I'm sorry, I'm just curious. Have you heard of a podcast then? Because 2013 podcast was really, really new, right?
Very new.
I
Well,
didn't
well,
even
I
know
mean,
about
podcasts have been.
podcasts.
Look, I think I was doing the very first podcast back in 1996 or 1996. I for HBO, I did a web show where I would interview people
Right.
at 3 in the morning. It was called 3 a.m. So every Wednesday night, I would go out in the streets of New York City at 3 in the morning and interview whoever I encountered. Because on a Saturday night, if you're out at 3 in the morning, I get it. You went to a party or whatever. But if you're out at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday night, usually something not very good is going on. And it was great. I did that for 3 years and I interviewed 20 people every week, 50 weeks a year. So that's like so I interviewed about 3,000 people. Is that right? I don't know.
Holy
Yeah,
shit.
for that 3 a.m. show. And each week we'd pick the 4 best interviews. And you couldn't really stream audio back then. The bandwidth wasn't enough, but we would transcribe the interviews. And I had different designers each week design the website. And we occasionally would put up video, but again, it wasn't very easy. But I did that for a long time. I mean, 3 years interviewing people at 3 in the morning. And I'm not a night person. Like I go to sleep like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. latest and wake up really early. And I remember one time, this is like 1995. One time I was at my
95.
girlfriend's house and it was about 3 in the morning and she was angry at me and kicked me out of the house.
What do you do?
uh, I don't even really know. She was an angry person. Like she was always really angry. And so we didn't really
Okay.
last long. But I remember she lived in the East Village and she just kicked me out. She starts yelling at me like, "Go!" And I leave, and it's like a Wednesday night, and the streets were packed. 3 in the morning, Wednesday night. And I'm like, what are all these people doing out? Like, don't they have work the next day or school the next day? Like, who are all these
Wait,
people? So I got insanely curious. Like, what are all these people doing outside at 3 in the morning? It was
also, like, how did they dress? Because like I felt like there are certain type of people that go outside at like past 12 o'clock. They always dress crazy. I don't know if that ever occurred to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I interviewed thousands of people during this period, and I
Right.
mean, I remember why they always had some weird, like. I remember one time I interviewed somebody who had like, I don't know what you call it, like he wanted to dress as if like all his limbs were like prosthetics, like he had a metal hand. He had a real hand, but he put like
What?
metal over one hand so it would seem like a prosthetic hand. And another guy had like a pet rat, and
Pet? Wait. Actual pet
yeah,
rat?
like
Like
it was on his
actual rat?
shoulder, a pet rat.
What?
I remember there was one guy who I would always run into. Eventually you start running into the same people at 3 in the morning. There was this one guy
Right.
who literally called himself 24-hour Kahati, and he would only be out at night. So he was more like 12-hour Kahati because he was only out at night. But he basically he kind of represented the philosophy that I sort of picked up doing this 3 a.m. show,
Oh,
which is that there's a flip side to life. Like we always think of life as wake up, have your coffee, go to work, come home, eat dinner, spend time with family, go to sleep, repeat. And but this was a flip side of life where all these people, for better or for worse, had to kind of figure out how to live in another way. They didn't have the normal 9 to 5. Maybe they were runaway kids, maybe they were prostitutes or pimps or drug dealers or drug addicts. maybe they were mentally ill. I mean, I ran into all of these types of people. Maybe they were, you know, everybody had something. Everybody had a story. Like I remember one time for one of these, I had an idea. I'm going to stand outside the Chelsea Hotel at 3 in the morning. I lived at the Chelsea Hotel, but I'm going to stand outside the Chelsea Hotel and just interview everybody who was coming in. And there was like one kid, not kid, like maybe he was in his 20s. He like rides his bicycle up to the Chelsea Hotel, rides into the lobby. And I'm like, what are you doing here at 3 in the morning? And he said, oh, I'm visiting my mom. Who visits their mom at 3 in the morning in a hotel? And
Quote unquote mom,
yeah,
you know?
and another girl came in and she was like at 3 in the morning. She was a party planner, but she was dressed like a medieval knight, like with a sword and everything. And then someone
What?
told me later, like one of the guys at the desk told me later that she was a prostitute and she had like the penthouse in the Chelsea Hotel. And but and she even said to me at the end, you should come by and visit me sometime. We'll hang out. And I never did, of course, but everywhere I went, there was always strange stories. And
Do you think you can do that now? Like, given what's going on with the world, like the crime rate and goes up and stuff like
yeah,
that.
look,
Do you
people are
think you
doing it
would?
on TikTok. Hey, how much money do you make? Let's see what hot
Yeah,
girls do for a living. What
but
do you
they do
do?
it.
That's what's up.
But they, but they do it in a normal time. They don't go out at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, you can still do it. I mean, the only thing now is I don't think it's as interesting. Like New York City
Mm.
has cleaned up. There's no like I used to go to the meatpacking district because literally meat was packed there during the day. I don't even know what that means, meatpacking, but and then at night, the real meaning of the meatpacking district was it was all these uh then referred to as transvestite prostitutes. Now I don't know what you call them, non-binary prostitutes. I don't know what you would call them. And but
Get the
they had a
pronounce right.
hard life. Like a lot of those, uh,
Right.
let's call them women because they were dressed and looked like women and so on, and some of them were going through the surgery, and a lot of them were abused, in jail from the age of like 10 on, or juvenile detention, and they were raped and abused repeatedly as kids. So their sexual identity was really um, confused, in the way particular to them. And so they couldn't really survive during the day. Like McDonald's is not going to hire them during the day. And they were trans prostitutes. That's the only thing they felt they could do. And the laws were pushing them more and more west in Manhattan. That's where the meatpacking district was. That was always a reliable spot for good 3 a.m. interviews. That and the East Village, where there were a lot of homeless kids, and
Gotcha.
42nd Street, which was always busy 24 hours a day. Like it's amazing how 42nd Times Square was still pretty seedy then. It was cleaning up. Disney had bought basically every building on 42nd Street. Now they're all Broadway theaters, but at the time it was still a little seedy, and but it was constantly busy. There was always so much noise in Times Square at 3 in the morning. You couldn't even hear yourself talk. Very busy.
Hmm.
And I remember one time I went to there was a bus stop in Queens, and this bus stop, if you got on the bus only had one destination, which was Rikers Island, a jail. And the law was that if you could bail someone could be bailed out of jail 24 hours a day. So if someone was being bailed out at 3 in the morning, the bus would take the parents or friends or whatever with the bail money, and then they would take the the prisoner home as well on the same bus. And it always ran. It ran at 3 in the morning, and at the bus stop, there was all the prostitutes, pimps, and drug dealers because their customers were coming back from jail, so they would meet their customers at the bus stop. And I don't know, just had story after story.
Wait, so is that where you actually like honed your interview skill? Yeah, because when you talk to those people at 3 a.m. in the morning, there's no topic. You literally just walk up to the person and you just start talking to the person.
Yeah, so there was a couple of challenges in doing that. One is, first off, I'm a very shy person
Mm.
normally, and you have to just walk up to somebody and start talking to them, and then you have to convince them to tell you what they're doing. So like a lot of times people were up to no good. Like, and I was taking their photo, I was taking videos, I was, taking their name if they chose to give it to me. And so people were like, cheating on their spouses, visiting prostitutes, visiting drug dealers. And again, most of the activity, at least then, was not, all that on the up and up. And so then I had to kind of like, let's say a couple's arguing and they're arguing at 3 a.m. and it's just some random weird looking guy comes up to them and say, hey, you guys, what are you arguing about? Like, they're not going to just stop arguing and say, well, I think my boyfriend is cheating on me. They're not going to just like, sometimes people get angry at me and start yelling at me and trying to hit me. And I remember one time though, I did get a couple that was arguing, and she found some girl's phone number in his pocket, and he was a restaurant owner. So of course he was like cheating on her, and they were like arguing there. And you always wonder like what happened. One time, I don't know if I ever told you this story. One time I was so we would end the day. I would go with a production assistant and a photographer and a couple people. And one time we always end the day at the Empire Diner, which was on 11th Avenue and around 22nd Street. The waitress would always tell me if anything was going on in the diner, and she said, "Oh, there's some party going on back there." So I go up to these two tables where everybody seemed like they knew each other, and I said, "Oh, what's going on?" And this guy says in his British accent, "Oh, me and my girlfriend are celebrating that we just got engaged." And and she and all her friends are nodding and they're all laughing and smiling. And I said, "Well, I don't believe it. You guys should kiss, prove it." And so he reached over and kissed her and they started making out. And his friends are like, "Dude, what are you doing?" And it turns out he was engaged, but to a girl back in London, and they had never
Oh shit.
spoke before, this guy and this girl. And and then what happened was, because of that moment, I found this out later, because of that moment, he left his girlfriend, his fiance, and moved in with this girl he had just kissed. And
So basically, James, you have ruined someone's marriage,
yeah,
and then
well,
you
believe
started a
me,
new marriage.
that marriage would have been ruined anyway.
So you practically just helped that dude.
And well, yeah, and the way I found out was, so I was in Aspen for the the Aspen Comedy Festival, which HBO sponsored. This was like 6 months later, and I just randomly ran into some guy who was like, "Hey, you're that guy who interviewed us. I was at that table." And then he told me the story of what happened. That this whole thing happened. That this couple moved in together, and then they broke up, and it was all very exciting. But also, I should add, at the Aspen Comedy Festival, my job. I didn't just go for fun. My job there was to interview people, like to interview comedians.
Wait, but you were an interview. You were a journalist in HBO, right? You were just programmer.
No,
How
I
do you
wasn't.
get the?
I'm not an ex in anything, and
Yeah, but how do you get the part then, the job then?
I chose myself to do it. Like, and you could
You
say,
just
well, how
go
do you
there
do
and
that?
be
Don't you
like,
have a boss at HBO? Yeah, but at the time, I suggested, this was 1995. I suggested HBO do HBO.com, and so and as part of the deal there, I did the website. Nobody else knew how to make a website. So I did the website, and I asked the CEO, Jeff Bucas, "Hey, just like you do original TV programming, like, all the original HBO shows we know and love, how you do original web programming?" And he basically was like, "I don't care. Just do it. It's your generation." And so I would always pitch to every department in HBO, and I did this on my own. "Hey, why not do a website around the comedy festival? Why not do this website called 3 a.m.?" And so I basically, it was like I was running my own little TV network on the web. And
right.
so at the HBO comedy, at this Aspen Comedy Festival, I interviewed Rodney Dangerfield, George Carlin, like all these comedians that are like, super famous. And at the time they were famous also. It was a real big honor to interview them. But I had already done a lot of interviewing, pretty early on. And actually at the age of 12, I did my first paid in my first paid piece of interviewing and writing for the South Brunswick Central Post. I interviewed a bunch of politicians, like the Speaker of the House, various senators and congressmen. I was really into politics, so I interviewed all these people. But that's another story. But anyway, I really think this HBO thing, 3 a.m., was like the first podcast. It was like a podcast about what people are up to at 3 a.m. in New York City. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
Fast forward to 2013. What triggered you to like, hey, I'm just gonna sit down and talk to this person?
First, what triggered me was, and what triggers a lot of things that happen to people, is frustration. And
Oh,
it's an interesting thing because let's say you have a mildly bad job. Like you don't really like what you do, but you kind of like your coworkers, you kind of like your boss. I'll stay here another year. So if a situ or if you're of a mildly bad marriage, you're like, I don't want to be single. I could deal with this, until the kids grow up or whatever. So you put up with it for another year, another 2 years, and so on. So mildly bad and mildly frustrated are not enough to provoke change. Things have to be really bad to make you change. Like if you get fired, for instance, you'll change your jobs, obviously. Or if
yeah.
you really hate your boss, like your boss yells at you every day, you'll change your job. But mildly bad situations, you should change, but it doesn't feel strong enough to make a decision just yet. You could put up with it a little while longer, even though you should make the change in most cases. So, you know, I was I was always going on, in the OOs, I was writing a lot about finance, and I was going on CNBC every week to talk stocks. CNBC wanted me to do a show, Fox Business wanted me to do a show, and I didn't really enjoy it. Like I didn't really like, you know, I would always feel like I'd have to take a shower afterwards. I'd go on CNBC and they'd say,
Really?
talk about your 5 favorite stocks or talk about the economy. And I just didn't like, or argue with this guy about gold or whatever. And I just didn't, and you go on for 3 minutes. You don't really feel like you say anything substantial or interesting. And the anchors are kind of clueless as to what's going on. They're just being, handsome or beautiful.
Pretty, yeah.
And I would prepare for hours for a 3-minute segment, and then I'd have to drive out to the studio. I'd have to drive back. So the whole process for a 3-minute appearance would take like 6 hours. But it was only mildly bad because I also liked being on TV. It was kind of exciting. And then I remember in 2009, there was a period where CNBC just and Fox Business too just stopped having me on. And the reason is because that was, during the financial crisis, late 2008, early 2009. And I was very optimistic. I was saying this too shall pass. And now's the time when things are at their lows. Now's the time to buy stocks. I refused to be pessimistic. And they were like, you got to be a little pessimistic to look at the world out there. And I'm like, yeah, this is the time to be optimistic. Don't be optimistic when things are at a high. Be optimistic when there's opportunity. And so there was a period where they just stopped booking me for things. And I was a regular, like I was an official contributor. I was on
Right.
there every week. But they just stopped booking me for a while. And I got scared. I thought, oh, the key to my credibility as a, finance specialist or whatever was getting on CNBC and all these business shows. And I thought I would lose that credibility and like people would recognize me in the street and I thought, "Oh, this is great." But I realized I was letting my own happiness be dictated by CNBC or other financial institutions like that, financial media companies. And I just hated that feeling. And that's why I stopped going on CNBC as much. I still continued for a few more years, but not as much. And I just started writing my own stuff about my own life. And when I wanted a show or when I wanted a talk show, rather than pitch some TV company, hey, I could do your late, late, late show or whatever. I said, well, why do I need to do that when I could just do a podcast? And podcasting, it was not everybody was familiar with them, but it was starting to get out there. I mean, guys like Joe Rogan had a podcast, and Mark Maron, and there are a couple others.
Were they before you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Joe Rogan's
What
been around since 2009 doing a podcast, I think, and Mark
did
Maron also around that.
Did Tim Ferriss come after you or before you?
So after so Tim Ferriss was like my second or third guest on my podcast.
Right.
And shortly after that, a few weeks after that, he calls me and says, "Hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes about podcasting?" And I said, "Sure." And so he asked me, and this is the Tim Ferriss style and method, which I really learned from observing him do his podcast. But he asked me like 100 questions about podcasting, like everything you could possibly ask about podcasting. And then a few weeks after that, he started a podcast, and it was great. And that's how he launched his podcast. He was about 6 months after me, I think. But I remember he must have called not just me, but other podcasters. But again, I don't know actually. As far as I know, he just called me, but I'm assuming he called others. But he asked me a ton of questions, and I really appreciate how he interviewed people he thought were doing a good podcast. And that's, look, his show is the Tim Ferriss Show, just like I'm the James Altucher Show, and he has an interview format, and he does a really good job. I would say what he does even better is, he's really good with the podcast notes and, putting summaries and sending out emails about each podcast. I used to do that more. Like when I started, I did that, but he really kept it up consistently. And
Right. Yeah, because a lot of hard work because you have to. It's like a full-time job with those.
yeah, I mean, Tim's main thing is his podcast, but he doesn't do as many as I do. So he's able to do that. I have at least 3 guests, or I do 3 episodes a week. So, and he does like one every week or so. And I don't know if he's as regular, but he was in the beginning. And he's got a great show. And I would say that the main guys who were sort of had similar shows to me back then were like Jordan Harbinger, Lewis Howes. That's how I met a lot of those guys. Was
Gotcha.
because we were all kind of growing up together in podcasts.
So you have done 10 years now, right? Almost 10 years.
Yeah. So you figure 3 episodes a week on average.
Right.
Because there were some years where I did 2 episodes a week, and some years I did 4 episodes a week. I remember, and I've had a good bunch of podcast producers. Like Ryan Holiday's been. You're in the job right now that Ryan Holiday used to fill. Like Ryan Holiday used to be the producer of the podcast when I first started. I remember Ryan when I wanted to do 4 episodes a week. Ryan was like, that's too many people. They'd have to devote then like 8 hours a week to listening to you. But my view on that at the time, I thought he was right, and for what he was saying, he was correct. But people pick and choose what episodes they listen to, so I wanted to give them a wide variety of choices. They don't have to listen to every one. I think people thought then you had to listen to every episode of your favorite podcast, but nobody does that really.
Right.
So I've learned a lot throughout the whole process, and I definitely got better as an interviewer. Like I look back at some of my old episodes, and I can't even handle listening to them.
I remember even the Peter Thiel episodes, you were just listening in the bathroom. You're just not listening, recording in the bathroom. It's so echoey because you're just recording it on your phone or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, all the software was different. Sometimes I would just call people on the phone and hit record, and then I would be like driving in a car and record an episode.
But how has your interview style changed over the past 10 years? I assume it's very different from where you first started.
Yeah, I think I'm a lot less scared. I'm always a little intimidated by the people I interview. Like again, a lot of these people I interview are, people I've either admired or they've been heroes to me, or I'm just super curious about some aspect of their lives or one of their books that they've written. And I don't have someone on unless I'm like super curious about what they're up to and how they are, who they are. And so I was often very nervous, and that would affect my interviewing. And
right. There's one person that hung up on you, right? I remember.
Biz Marquis hung up on me.
Right.
I feel like I've talked about this recently on the podcast, but
no, recently, a while ago.
Yeah, Biz Marquis hung up on me when I asked him, how does it feel to have just one hit? And I didn't mean it to be in a bad way. Like his hit is a huge hit.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I've done more things. And I said, yeah, but if you go to China and ask people to like hum a song by Biz Marquis, they're all gonna hum the same song. Now I'm forgetting what the song was.
I don't even know who he is. I probably know the song, but I just don't know who he is. But like, would you?
Yeah, just a friend. Like if you just put in Biz Marquis, it even comes up Biz Marquis, just a friend. He was a funny guy, but yeah, he didn't really like that question, so he hung up. He's like, oh no, man.
But from that point on, were you afraid to offend anyone after that?
No, I never really tried to offend anyone because I'm all about finding people I'm curious about and I look up to it. I'm asking them sincere questions, and I want them. You know, there's a couple of things when you do. For me, when I do a
Right.
podcast, I want to be inspired by my guest because they might be
Oh,
a
thank
hero of
you.
mine, and B, I want to do a good job. I want them to think I'm smart and that I did a good job interviewing. And I know this sounds kind of like childish, but it's true. And C, I kind of want them to like me and be my friend for every guest.
Right.
And again, these are like kind of childish goals, but I
What?
have become friends with some of these people who have been my heroes, which is
Who was the guest that you become friend after?
a
I mean,
lot of people.
AJ way beforehand, right? And the
Yeah,
AJ
I
is
mean,
a
a lot of
friend.
people I knew anyway, but some people I became friends with. One big example, like when I was a kid, like my hero in chess was Gary Kasparov, and then we ended up
Oh
being
yeah,
friends after he came on the podcast a few times. And I've had a couple of people like that, and I really like
right,
all the people who have come on as guests. Or let's say 95% of them.
right. So okay, so now we have the James Altucher show. We have like 5 different series, sub series in there now, right? Because we have Side Hustle Friday, we have Makes You a Millionaire, Wall Street Insane, My Favorite Things, and James Mentor People, and more. Which one is your favorite of the sub series?
I just like experimenting with format, and I think, listen, first off, everybody should do a podcast because it's a moment where you really choose yourself. You know how many people listen to a TV show on CNBC, for instance? Fewer people than listen to this podcast. So, uh, most cable TV, nobody listens to. So to have a show where someone's actually listening to you is such a pleasure, and to be able to offer something of value that could potentially help other people, which is always my goal. Is to I forgot to mention my biggest goal with guests is to hopefully the guests inspire others, the listeners.
Okay, I always have these questions because I want to start a podcast, but I don't know why I want to start. How do you find a niche and your passions?
Oh,
I
oh,
like me, like I love a lot of different things, but I don't know if I'm passionate into one. And also,
well, that was my point. Is that a starting a podcast, you could call up anyone you want and ask them to come on your podcast. Some will say yes, many will say no,
right,
no matter how big you are, because maybe they're busy or whatever. But so that's always a pleasure. The other thing is, don't get stuck in one niche. You're gonna run out of material. Like sometimes I don't feel like interviewing anyone. Like this episode, we're not interviewing any. You're interviewing me,
right,
and
yeah,
uh, sometimes I want to play around with formats to see maybe this, so I did Ask Altucher, I did Side Hustle Fridays where we talked about side hustles. I did, James will make you a millionaire, James will mentor you. We did Good or Bad with AJ. I did Question of the Day with Steve Demner. So that was a separate podcast, but you always want to experiment with format and maybe you come across something that's new and interesting and you feel excited about. And you always got to keep it fresh. Every part of your life, you always have to keep, change is the only thing that doesn't change. So there's
right,
always change in life. And so you have to embrace that and look for the change, not run from the change. And so experimenting with different formats is a must. So if someone is just doing a podcast, like if you're doing a podcast that's very niche, it's only going to have a limited time span. So there was a great podcast. I don't know if it's still running. I don't think it is. I haven't heard of it lately. But podcast was called Denzel Washington is the greatest actor ever, period. And I thought that was such a great title for a podcast because it's kind of funny and it's what you're getting. It's just about Denzel. Every episode they analyze another Denzel Washington movie, and that's a great idea. But it's going to have a limited run because there's only so many Denzel Washington movies,
right.
and I wanted to be broader than that. And so some people thought I was going to do just a podcast about money, which would be so boring to me. And so, like, I think it was on my second or third episode, I had on Wayne Dyer, who was this big
Oh
spiritual
yeah,
writer. And then I had on Tucker Max, who's, a writer of I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell and Assholes Finish First. These are major bestsellers. Definitely, they weren't podcasts about money. So I think people got the idea right away that, oh, this is going to be something different. And so I think now when people start a podcast, they think they have to niche. And look, if you do niche down, that will find an audience because you'll get people who are really obsessed with that niche. And I like John Lee Dumas's advice. So John Lee Dumas has a podcast called Entrepreneurs on Fire. It's a great podcast. He does 5 episodes a week, and it's about different types of entrepreneurs. But he suggests to people in general, niche down twice. So you're gonna do a podcast about careers, niche down again. Okay, you're gonna do a podcast about lawyers, niche down again. Third niche down. Oh, I'm gonna do a podcast about divorce lawyers. Okay, that's a triple niche down, and that would probably be an interesting podcast. But I can never do that. I like to be about general peak performance and other fascinating stories. So mostly it's about peak performance, but sometimes when I do these mini series, it's about other things. Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these 3 numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James.
Okay, so after these 10 years, after all these 10 years, what is the biggest takeaway from the podcast for you? For me, it's a lot because the first time I met you and worked on a show was Jesse Itzler. That's my
Yeah.
first time ever dealt with podcasts, my first time ever record podcasts, my first time ever heard about podcasts. And then I fall in love right away because I learned so much from Jesse Itzler, from AJ Jacobs. And eventually I went on become the full-time engineer.
Yeah, and then now producer. Yeah, so Jesse Itzler, let's just take that case right there. So this was like almost exactly 7 years ago. This was like in March of 2016. And Jesse Itzler had just written a book about training with SEAL. I forgot the name of the book, Living with a SEAL, 31 Days Training.
Right.
And he had lived with David Goggins for 31 days, and he wrote a book about the experience, and it was really intense. But Jesse Itzler is a great example where the guy's larger than life. He's like super charismatic. As Sarah Blakely told me about Jesse, because Sarah, his wife, and a billionaire, she's the founder of Spanx. She came on the podcast also and told me that Jesse thought very highly of me, and so she came on the podcast because if he says something, then she always listens. He's got a very distinct personality, but he's gone through his whole set of failures and difficulties, and what you learn when you talk to these 1,300 people, and these are the best performers in their industries in the world. Like everybody ranging from Richard Branson to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was, the highest scoring basketball player ever until I think LeBron James broke his record a few weeks ago. But life is hard. Life is really, really hard for people, and people get frustrated and they get upset. And the harder you try to be something interesting and something compelling and to do something interesting, the harder it is and the more painful and frustrating it is. And again, like I said earlier, it's only like with real pain that you feel like you need to change. And so all these people had experienced really painful things, everybody. And so they felt like they needed change. And it was the change that they created that led to them learning. Nobody becomes a success just by luck, or very few people. There's on top of that, there's a huge amount of work. And then there's a huge amount of meta work. So what do I mean by that? Like, well, there's the work of building a podcast, for instance, and that's hard work. But then there's the work of the psychology of trying to do something great, because you're going to fail a lot. And what if one month we don't have as many viewers as the month before? You have to deal with the psychology of that. Or what if guests refuse you and then you see them on other podcasts? It's a little painful, and you have to deal with all the psychology of or like you said, how do you get better at interviewing? A lot of people just don't get better at interviewing, and you have to start to understand what you're good at and what you're bad at, and then start to understand how can you improve the things you're bad at, because it's not so easy. People think you just have to study something and you get better at it. That's not true at all.
Right.
You have to, your brain has been driving down one highway, all your life, and you have to figure out how to take a new route. It's not that easy. Maybe your car will break down if you try to go on dirt roads instead of the highway. And it's very hard to change, even though it's necessary to achieve greatness. Not that greatness is always the goal. Sometimes the only goal is showing up for that change, and that's success. And always evolving and going on to the next thing. Like, look, you were an audio engineer when I met you. This was your first podcast that you even listened to, and now you're producing you speak now. You're like a major speaker at podcast conferences. I mean, and you consult to people on how to set up their podcast. And you just shot a writing course with me. Like you did all the shooting, directing, producing, and it's going to launch soon on Udemy. Like that's a whole new, avenue for an outlet for us. So learning from these 1,300 guests, that every one of them, they kind of not only had their story, but they had their meta story. That to me was very interesting. That you can't just, if you want to be good at tennis, you can't just learn how to serve. You have to learn how to deal with showing up at 5 a.m. for, intense workouts every day. You have to learn to deal with loss. You have to learn to deal with the business side of being a professional tennis player. If you can't succeed as a professional tennis player, you have to decide how you're going to transform your advantages, the things that you learn in tennis, into some other career that you're just as successful at. and on and on. These are the meta skills, and they're almost more important than the basic skills.
So, was there any down moment for you in podcasting?
Yeah, almost every moment.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's like,
What is the most down moment for you? Because I produced you for so long. Obviously, every time you show up for the interview, you perform. Because podcasting is a performance. It's
it
hard.
is.
It's
It's
hard
totally a
work.
performance.
Yeah. So like, I can't really see your downs.
I think it's hard when I think also constantly finding new ways to keep the podcast and show exciting is always difficult. Like that's frustrating because I want it to be good. So I'm always thinking, how could it be different and better? And how can I improve myself? And I study other interviewers. And there's also sometimes, Jay, like you'll book me 5 different podcasts in a week and everybody's written 2 books. And I've got to read 10 books in a week. So all I'm doing
Sorry.
is reading. And I'm like from 6 in the morning to 10 at night, I'm like reading books. And sometimes
Yeah. Sometimes I'm happy when I book someone. I'm on the show. I'm like, yeah, I did my job. I'm like, yeah, I'm proud. But then you have to do all the hard work.
yeah, no, but you have to do the hard work too. You have to deal with like if I'm at the last minute, if I'm not ready, I'm not going to do an episode, which I think is going to be subpar. So I always have to ask you to reschedule sometimes. And I know that must be hard, like the third time you're rescheduling someone, or if I have suddenly something I have to do at the time and it happens to be somebody that you had already rescheduled, it's always,
Yeah.
I'm sure that's painful too.
Yeah. Just the other day, we say no to Obama.
I know, like when I keep pushing Obama off until he's like mad at me, and then I feel really bad as former president of the United States. So
But yeah, I mean, it's hard work to perform in front of the podcasting. Like sometimes when I try to, sometimes when we do like 2-person podcast, just you and me, like I had to keep up with you. It's hard. Like it's really hard. Like I never done this before, not a lot. So like I can felt like the pain halfway through the interview. I'm like, oh shit, what if I run out of thing to ask?
I always worry about that too. And sometimes, because I'm a little bit nervous, sometimes I'm asking a question, and like midway through the question, I'll forget what question I'm asking, and that's sometimes hard because you're trying to juggle like 1,000 things in your head, like not only all the things about this person's story, but you have to also remember what did they just say 2 minutes ago that you remind yourself you wanted to follow up on, but first you let them finish, but then another question pops up in your head. Like in order to be good at podcasting or really to be good at anything, you have to be insanely curious. And you have to sometimes you're not feeling curious that day. So you have to kind of motivate yourself to feel insanely curious and then keep track of all the things you're curious about. I try to write a few notes before the podcast, but I also like to let things go where they go instead of, a formal outline.
Right.
So it's complicated. It is a show. It is a kind of improvised performance for the hour or so that I'm doing an episode with somebody.
You know what really impressed me the most is that like every time a guest say something, I never see you write anything down, and then you can ask them the questions after.
Yeah, because it's sort of like you get into this hyper focused state
Yeah.
where the guest is the only person in existence, and everything they're saying is like drops of diamonds, and you have to kind of gather all the diamonds and you know spend them wisely, and you just really focus on what they're saying and who they are and what you're curious about, and you I always remember these guests are on the podcast for a reason. Like how for every one guest, how many people do you think pitch us? Because we get pitched
We
all the
could
time.
all the time, like 5. I would say maybe like 10, and also like
Yeah, I would say it's about a 10-to-1 ratio,
yeah,
give or take.
and also like sometimes when people pitch to me, they will say like, "Hey, I really love your podcast," and then they just write podcast name.
Yeah, no, they those are all almost always rejections. I feel bad for the people who hire those publicists.
Right.
But someone's on the podcast because I'm already really interested in them. Like I won't settle for less than that. But consequently, I'm constantly getting frustrated because let's say I really did want the president of the United States on, I'm probably not going to get him. And a lot of people say no to me, and I mean not a huge amount, but enough. And that's that's something I have to push through as well.
Right. So, what's the plan for the next 10 years?
I think the key is to keep innovating on the format. Again, I always love interviewing people. Now, one thing we've heard over and over from guests, particularly recently, is the importance of being social. But now it's like the main people I speak to during the week are you, my wife, and my podcast guests. And so part of the reason for doing the podcast is just to be social with these new people that I really admire. And that's a big thing for me. But so I want to continue doing interviews, obviously, and I
Right.
think there's a lot more to learn from. So everybody's got something to teach. The other day I was reading something that about a topic that interested me, and I see a friend of mine quoted. Apparently, he's the expert in this. So we've never had him on the podcast. I plan on calling this guy and
Oh,
seeing
who
if
is
he'll
it?
come on the podcast. Scott Barry Kaufman, if you're out there listening to this, come on my
I thought
podcast. I've been on your
no,
podcast,
he
Scott.
been on our show before during
Oh,
the
I thought,
pandemic.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. He was.
during the pandemic.
And I was on
Yep.
his, and then when he was during the pandemic, yeah, he
came
came
on.
when he came out with the book. What was that book?
I can't remember the book. That was like
I forget the names of all the books.
yeah, but he was great because I remember that was the first time we used Squadcast, and because it was so new because the remote recording industry was so
I think his
new.
book was called Transcendent.
Or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah. Transcend, the new science of self-actualization.
Yeah.
But he's really into something now called obsessive interest versus harmonious interest,
Right.
as a way of mastering a topic. It's better to have harmonious interest as opposed to obsessive interest.
Gotcha.
And so I want to talk to him more about that, because for anybody who wants to get better at anything, these are useful distinctions. And when I've tried describing it to others, they're always very fascinated. So I'm looking forward to if Scott will come on again. I'm looking forward to having him on.
Right. Yeah. We
But,
just have him on. I have one thing to pitch you.
Yeah.
You should open a bookstore, and then at the back of the bookstore is a podcast studio. So anytime they do a like how people have new book come out, they have to promote their book. They can promote the book
Yeah,
in
they
the
have to come
bookstore
and do a book signing at the store,
and then
do a
do
book
a
reading.
podcast after.
You know, it was nice when I had the stand-up comedy club is that we could always use the comedy room though, where there's room for an audience
Right. Yeah.
to have podcasts. I mean, we had David Goggins on in
Yep.
the front of the audience.
We
We
have
had
John C. McGinley, and then we have Michio Kaku in front of the crowd, and then we have
and William Shatner.
William Shatner. We have Mike Love in front of the crowd. Remember Mike Love?
Yeah, Mike Love. Well, he had the whole crowd singing. So Mike Love was one of the main singers, or the lead singer for the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And so he had everybody singing Kokomo by the end.
Yeah. So that was fun. You should just open a bookstore here. A small one. Don't have the big one. A small one, right? Because you know what? Who go to bookstore buy books anymore? No, right?
I have to open up a bookstore in my house then, because I never leave my house.
And then they just come do book reading, and then do a podcast during the book reading, and then that's a podcast. And then we meet new people. We meet and then more people want to come on the show. Maybe Barack Obama will come on the show.
And I always want to keep innovating though. I want to find, new ideas, maybe I go out and experience something and record it while I'm experiencing it. Kind of like, I really admire the formats in a lot of YouTube channels now. And I think, I'm looking to those people as potential inspirations of how their formats, like a little bit more commentary. Like I like Moist Critical, how he does this kind of very dry but like funny commentary on news events and memes and stuff like that. So there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. And look, that's the competition, is YouTube. I understand people listen to podcasts when they can't watch videos because they listen on the commute to work, they listen in the gym, and so on. But I mean, we were one of the few podcasts, according to our hosts, the people who host our podcast, we're one of the few podcasts that gained volume during the pandemic because people were no longer commuting.
Right.
And so they weren't listening to podcasts as much. But, we were doing a lot of stuff about the pandemic, so people were listening to us.
Yeah.
But having that ability to change formats and ideas, is critical.
Yeah. Speaking of changing format and constantly innovating the podcast, so part of the whole reason why we do these episodes, and I pitched James doing this episode is we want to see what our listener habit is like so we try to do like a listener survey. So there are like 5 questions in this Google form. One of it is like, how and where do you find a show? And if you were to recommend a show to your friend, how would you pitch it? Would you make the show longer or shorter, and why? And then one of it is, this I have to ask you as well, James. So if the show dies tomorrow, if I die tomorrow and no other people can take over my role, and the show just died tomorrow, what would you miss most about the show?
I would really miss the fascinating interactions I have with people. Like, I really love meeting new, interesting, exciting people. I've always loved that all my life, and people I'm curious about and people who impress me and inspire me. And I want to kind of take what inspires me and interview them, and hopefully it inspires all the listeners. I think I would really miss kind of the social aspect of, I mean, like I said, it wasn't exaggerating. You and the podcast guests are like the only people I talk to during the week. So, are the main people I talk to during the week. So, I would miss that a lot.
Oh,
And I would miss also, to be honest, I would miss, I was just in a hotel the other day, and somebody comes up to me out of nowhere and says, "Oh, I love your podcast." And it's a little bit of ego, but I would miss that part too. If you see me anywhere, please come up to me and tell me you listen to the podcast. You don't even have to tell me you like the podcast. Just tell me you listen to the podcast, and I'll be
right.
happy.
Or you can say, like, I thought you were Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I loved Blink. I love the Tipping Point."
Right.
Um.
And-
So Jay, you said there's a survey. What's the URL
Right.
for the survey?
So the URL for the survey is jamesaltuchershow.com/listeners with the S. jamesaltuchershow.com/listeners. And
James Altucher, is it the JamesAltucherShow.com or James
just
Altucher Show?
jamesaltuchershow.com/listener.
So JamesAltucherShow.com
/
listeners.
And also we are trying to bring back Ask Altucher again. So it will be the similar link. It's a Google form as well for you to ask us anything, just James about anything. So the link for that is jamesaltuchershow.com/askaltucher. So it's again jamesaltuchershow.com/askaltucher. But yeah, James, thank you so much for doing this episode. This is my first time hosting an episode. It's pretty heavy. It's a heavy weight to carry.
Well, you do a good job of it, Jay. Maybe you could host more for me.
See, I really want to be a co-host of anything, because I feel like co-host is the best thing to do, because the host will do anything, and if I find something funny, I'll just make funny comments, and that's it.
By the way, and look, it could be the case that we end up doing more episodes. Particularly, we're in discussions with, despite what I said earlier about shows and radio shows and choosing myself, we have been approached by some radio companies about also doing this on radio. So that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Again, as long as I'm not begging for it, I'm happy. When they come to me is when things are right.
Yeah. People come to us for almost everything.
Yeah, which is good.
All right.
But Jay, thanks so much for suggesting we do this. It's going to be a fun year with the 10th year anniversary of this podcast, and we'll think of a lot of fun things to do. And we have a lot of great guests coming up and things that I've been inspired by.
Yeah, I think at the 10 years anniversary, we should do a live episodes of all the guests that you like come on, play a chess with you, and do a podcast at the same time. No matter like how good their chess is, they have to play at least one game.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Jay.
Entresto, sacubitril valsartan tablets, is the #1 heart failure brand prescribed by cardiologists and has helped over 1 million people with heart failure. It's a prescription medicine that treats adults with long-lasting chronic heart failure and works better when the heart cannot pump a normal amount of blood to the body.
Don't take Entresto if pregnant. It can cause harm or death to an unborn baby. Don't take Entresto with an ACE inhibitor or aliskiren, or if you've had angioedema with an ACE or ARB. Don't take with aliskiren or within 36 hours of taking an ACE inhibitor. The most serious side effects are angioedema, low blood pressure, kidney problems, or high blood potassium. Angioedema is swelling of your face, lips, tongue, and throat that may cause death. If it causes difficulty breathing, get emergency help.
Ask your doctor about Entresto. To learn more, visit support.intrusto.com or call 833-446-6699. For pricing, visit intrusto.com/cost. If you can't afford your medication, Novartis may be able to help.
It's time to save. Clear the Rack is on at your Nordstrom Rack store. For a limited time, take an extra 25% off clearance. All sales are final. Hurry, shop this sale at Nordstrom Rack today. Please see nordstromrack.com or ask a store associate for details.